Pessimistic predictions from both sides and attention-hungry mainstream media fanning the winds of war. The world is watching Ukraine. Where else should we be watching? Let's ask John Sitilides, geopolitical strategist at Trilogy Advisors and a diplomacy consultant to the Department of State, and former Pentagon official and RT contributor Michael Maloof. China, Iran, Russia recently carried out 3 days of joint naval drills in the Gulf of Oman, their second such exercise since 2019. The Defense Ministry in Beijing said the exercise was to, quote, jointly safeguard maritime security and promote regional peace and stability. John, there are disputed waters half a world away, and the Gulf of Hormuz is one of the world's most strategically major choke points. What is at stake there that will impact us here?
Well, we have here 3 very important countries on different parts of the Eurasian continent, Holland. And so Russia seeks to displace the United States from the western part of Eurasia in Europe. China seeks to displace the United States from the eastern part of Eurasia along the western Pacific region. And Iran seeks to displace the United States from the Middle East. The 3 powers are working together in different ways. I believe between Russia and Iran, it's more tactical, especially on Russia's part, where Iran is a useful partner in Syria, in engaging in operations against Sunni Arab allies of the United States, and keeping the United States very much focused on the Middle East when it wants to pivot to both Asia and deal, especially now with Russia, regarding Ukraine. For China, it's a little bit of a different story, I would say, because China actually has very tangible interests in the Persian Gulf region and the Indian Ocean. This is the maritime superhighway that connects Chinese markets to natural resources, not only in the Middle East, but also to Africa and to markets in Europe. And so China is working with Iran. They do have maritime security concerns in the Indian Ocean. And of course, Iran has now entered into a 25-year, $400 billion oil for infrastructure investment arrangement with China. And Iran recently just sent proposals to Russia to shore up their strategic collaboration on a number of issues for the next 2 decades. So this is going to be a very difficult situation for the United States and our regional partners, because Iran really is a hegemonic aspirant in the Middle East, and is going to continue to destabilize our allies and supply lines in the Middle East and beyond for years to come.
Yeah, this has supply chain written all over it. Just this past week, a U.S. Navy F-35C crash landed on the carrier USS Carl Vinson before falling into the South China Sea. Those are deep waters, so it may take weeks to salvage the plane. Michael, that Lockheed F-35C is, in automotive parlance, loaded. What if the Chinese get a hold of it before we do?
Well, I don't think they're going to. The United States immediately would surround that area with all kinds of warships to do exactly that, to protect it until it can retrieve. It can retrieve it eventually, depending upon how deep it is, and it'll take time. But it's in international waters, and I think that U.S. warships will certainly guard that because of the types of technologies and capabilities that the Chinese would just love to get their hands on. But they've done a pretty good job on their own aircraft, the J-20 and derivatives thereof. And I think that, but I don't think the Chinese will make a very active effort to get it because of that. But to get back to what you were talking about just now with John, we have something here that is showing a potential explosion worldwide. We have the United States up against 3 other countries now, and it's also related to the Ukraine. And if this thing blows up in the Ukraine, it could have a domino effect with China, Russia, and Iran as well. And we could potentially have not just a 3-front, but a 4-front war, because it would bring in Lebanon once Hezbollah attacks Israel because of Iran. And I think that we are somehow there does seem to be a war we don't like, and we just got to stop doing this.
Yeah.
Because you got those three countries right now are all members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and they are very much involved in economic, political, and they are trying to do power projection. All of China, especially with Russia and Iranian assistance.
Yeah, world's getting to be a smaller place. And other than what we cannot find on supermarket shelves lately, much of what's in short supply requires computer chips, and it's getting worse. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo says we aren't even close to being out of the woods as it relates to the supply problems with semiconductors. In normal times, manufacturers have a 40-day inventory. Now we're down to 5 days with what Raimondo calls no room for error. John, during World War II, my dad was in ordnance, bombs and bullets. Back to the Future, have computer chips been weaponized?
I'm not certain that they've been deliberately weaponized, Holland. I think it's important to look back at the last 2 to 3 years of the semiconductor sector on the world stage. We began to see a significant increase in demand for semiconductors or for chips. Around 2019, especially as many countries were beginning their rollout towards 5G telecommunications technology, and also an increased demand in electric vehicles. And of course, these semiconductors are essential components of almost anything that runs on an electronic system or a computing system today. I think what happened is that with the COVID lockdowns around the world in 2020 going into 2021, we had severe disruptions. Workforces in many important countries, especially in Taiwan, but also in China and other Asian countries. Keep in mind, Holland, we used to produce most of our own semiconductors here in the United States. That was outsourced over the last 15 to 20 years. Asia today produces about 87% of the world's semiconductors, and Taiwan alone produces about 60 to 65%, but 90% of all of the most advanced semiconductors are manufactured in Taiwan. So as those economies were disrupted by COVID lockdowns and China continues to perhaps unwisely maintain a zero COVID policy, I don't know how long that's sustainable, where they'll continue to have lockdowns through 2022 and perhaps into next year. We're probably going to see continued disruptions in semiconductor supplies. But with the work from home, a strategy now that's been adopted here in the United States and in many Western European countries, we have an increased surge in demand for semiconductors that has only exacerbated the supply disruptions that we've already had over the last 2 years. And we're especially seeing this now in the inflation rate for automobiles that probably accounts, the auto industry and all of its attendant industries, for about 1/3 of the inflation hike that we've seen in the US and in the West in just the last several months. So we're looking to see what we can do to reshore manufacturing of semiconductors. The Senate now has passed a bipartisan bill in June of last year, the CHIPS Act, to try to put about $52 billion into the economy to help promote semiconductor manufacturing in the US. Unfortunately, the House unveiled its version several days ago, and it looks to add several $billion in climate-related policies. Republicans claim that it's a green energy slush fund, which means it's going to be very difficult for the Senate and the House to reconcile their respective versions of this bill anytime before Memorial Day, which is the scheduled date for passage of the bill. So I think we may find continued disruption of U.S.-based manufacturing of chips well beyond this year, unfortunately.
Keep an eye on Taiwan. North Korea is at it again. 6 missile tests this month, according to South Korea. Michael, take us inside the Pentagon. What sort of readiness uptick does this trigger? I got about a minute.
Yeah, we're going to be watching it very closely. I might add, even North Korea now is beginning to realize that its shooting off of missiles is having very little impact. And what I'm really concerned now is that North Korea could resort to something even more drastic and even more threatening if they don't, if there isn't some kind of an arrangement made and closer cooperation between us and the North Koreans, and certainly with the South Koreans and the Japanese. So all of this is another area that is potentially a hotspot that we have been ignoring recently, but it could easily play in and play off the other crises that I mentioned a little earlier.
Yep, Michael Maloof, John Sitilides, thank you for stepping into the big picture. Appreciate your time and perspective. The situation in Ukraine makes strange bedfellows. Over on Fox News, young Tucker Carlson has irked viewers by rationalizing Russia's border buildup, saying, Vladimir Putin does not want Belgium. He just wants to keep his western borders secure. That's why he doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO, and Carlson says that makes sense. Until otherwise, Putin points out that his military remains in his country, and it is others arming up just miles away. And we felt the same way during the Kennedy-Khrushchev stare-down over Soviet missiles in Cuba. Just a year earlier, our president offered a warning we should all heed now.
Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident or miscalculation or by madness. The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us.